brought up. First of all, there were 2 points that you brought up that I'd like to respond to. First of all, you said that it was okay, that if nobody is talking about it, nobody will think about it. First of all, I'd like to make a clarification. We are not saying that rape cannot be discussed or talked about at all. We are not saying that as an issue, as a social ill, it cannot be addressed in social discourse such as this. We are not tabooing, in fact, this discussion we are having today. The problem we have is the medium for which you are transmitting this information. Humor and joking about it and caricaturizing it is not an appropriate medium for bringing about that social change which we want. Joking about it is the problem that we have, not merely talking about it. We would love it if we could talk about it as an issue so that change could be made. But making jokes about it, making light of it, is not a way to get that social change. Instead, what we can see being happening, if we intend to use mirthful jokes, as you said, to make fun of the rapists and to make fun of the high and mighty, what we can see is that by making them buffoons or clowns, this type of act of caricaturizing it leads to further cheapening of the severity of the act. It's making it something funny, something like a circus, which is not funny. It is serious, it is severe, it changes people's lives. That is why we do not recommend and do not in our ethics say that it is morally acceptable to joke about it if we are not actually an authority on that experience. With that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague who's going to continue.
There was one point that you brought up about those who are victims, if they are allowed to say this and say it in public, they'll get labeled as a rape victim. We specifically said victims cannot say it in public. We said the one thing that we're advocating is either in a mirror by yourself or in a controlled setting, like a little AA group, like people who are victims talking amongst each other to try to get over this. We're not saying going out and proclaiming it on the hills. And so we're not saying that. Additionally, you were talking about it would be taboo for us to have, rape itself would become taboo. We want to reiterate, talking about rape would not become taboo. Talking about rape becomes sillier the more you use jokes. What we're saying is that we want to be serious about this topic because this is serious. You brought up a correlation that's not quite right. You said that if you take away jokes, that doesn't mean that rape's going to go down. Yes, but if you have jokes, then rapes will probably go up. You want to know why? Because people will take it less seriously. People will be able to do that. James has a point he wants to add.
Now, the moral evil we're addressing here is not necessarily rape, but the aggressions that happen on the part of the person who is hearing a joke. As we're not proposing taboo rape jokes as a way to address the problem of rape wholesale. We're addressing the problem of what amounts to an incredibly offensive and hurtful and damaging remark, and that is primarily the reason why we want to make these jokes taboo, not to fix problems in society as you would have it.
Just 2 other points I wanted to make sure we were clear on. First of all, Washington State, you guys brought up that how are we going to implement this? So, what is the solvency of this plan? And I'd just like to point out that the burden of the question isn't to give an exhaustive plan or implementation or government policy of some sort. What we're talking about is morality, and on a case-to-case basis, an individual basis, what should the moral implications or moral impetus be of a person? So we don't have that burden of having an exhaustive implementary plan. Second of all, you mentioned the fear that people will thus become labeled. If these are the only people that can talk about jokes, well, obviously if someone is joking about it, then therefore it's known that that has happened to that person. And so a couple things on this. First of all, that is why we limited it so much. That is why we limited it to such a controlled environment, one-on-one or by themselves or in a controlled group, in which the knowledge usually is that you're with a friend. That friend knows. You're able to share. You're able to be with for that person to know about that. But also, it's again, it goes back to the assumption that this is in public, which is not what is happening.
Finally, the answer that you had brought up, that it is acceptable to laugh at people who are mighty, that was a confusing answer, particularly because are you then saying it's okay to laugh at someone if they're in a mighty position and they get raped? We can laugh at that? Because that seems like a very hard thing to put forward. So what do you mean by, is it acceptable to laugh at the mighty? We weren't exactly sure what you meant. Did you merely mean victims can laugh at their assaulters? That seems odd as well. What we want to do right now is we want to reiterate that in our original case, we addressed both parts of the question. The question had practical and morally acceptable function in circumstances. We had morals of both moral deference and virtue ethics, but then we also looked at the practicality of not saying this in public settings because of the confusing things that would lead to, and then limiting who actually can say this. So we addressed both parts of the question in a very structured organization, and we look forward to what the judges have to say. Thank you.
Next time. Judges, take it.